Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to show you what to do if you've recently received some mail order plants. So when it comes to mail order plants, they generally are very small plants. You normally order them either from an online catalogue on a website or from a catalogue that comes through the door and you send it through the post. So the issue with mail order plants is they tend to be very small, they tend to be lower quality, not always, but they do normally tend to be lower quality than other plants, and you can't see what you're getting until they arrive, so you can't pick the nicest and best looking plants. So I'm going to tell you how to look after them when they arrive, what to do with them, and what to expect when you do get them. So when they do come through the post, I would say always expect them to be much smaller than you'd expect. For example, these here are incredibly small. You can see these are very small plug plants. They're very, very young, very small root systems, and part of the reason of that is to get it through the postal system they need to be small. It makes it a lot easier to post if it's not a large bulky plant, and that size of the plant will incur a lot of problems when it comes to looking after them, so you do need to make sure you look after them in the correct way. Most mail order plants, as I say, do come as very small plants, and that can create a lot of problems, but they're easy to overcome, and I'll explain how to overcome them in this. So the reason they come in such small sizes is to keep postage costs down. Also, sometimes mail order companies will try and keep them small enough to put through your letterbox or your post box without having to knock on your door, so that they make sure it gets there even if you're out. And it also helps with the speed that they can ship these plants out. Basically keeps their costs down. They can sow the seeds and they can get the plants shipped out within just a few weeks instead of waiting for months. So this can keep the cost down, so you can get a lot of plants for a small price, but they are incredibly small and you'll need to grow them on yourself in a controlled environment before you put them out in the garden. If you put them out in the garden at this size, they'll probably struggle and might get destroyed by pests and diseases quite easily. So it is good to shelter them inside if you can, or in a sheltered part of the garden until they're ready. So when they do arrive, they'll normally be in pretty bad condition. The reason for that is they've been pushed into a plastic container. They're normally put in something like this, a clear plastic container, just for strength. Sometimes if they're bigger plants, they might have cardboard boxes or maybe some kind of padding to pad them out. But if it's the general mail order plants, they'll come like this in a plastic tray or maybe a clip-on plastic container just to give them a little bit of protection. But they will have been in there for at least 2 days normally, sometimes longer, so they're not going to be looking at their best. And quite often you'll have one or two that have died off in transit, or sometimes I do wonder if they die off even before they send them. So you can see here there's a couple missing there. That's quite common. Also, you'll find the plants might be quite stretched, a little bit pale in colour and just not looking too healthy. That's completely normal, and don't expect to get 100% good looking plants with every mail order. A lot of the times they'll be damaged, and that's mainly because of their postage, because they've been shipped. They've not had light for a while, they might have been hot conditions, they might have dried out, and they've not had any airflow, so often you'll get a little bit of mould in some of them. They'll be starting to stretch for the light and they'll just not be looking great. So one way to avoid this poor condition of plants is when you do order them, if you have the option for faster shipping, try and go for the fastest shipping possible. And the other thing is, as soon as you get the plant, the sooner you open the packet, the better. So, because plants need to be outside in the fresh air, in good light conditions and water. If they're in a box with no light whatsoever and no access to additional water, they're going to dry out and they're basically going to starve without that sunlight. And without a good airflow, that's when they get mold and other problems occurring. So as soon as it arrives, if you can, open it up, get it ready for planting. If you can't, don't leave it somewhere on the doorstep where it gets lots of sunshine and it gets really hot. Take it inside, put it somewhere shady, away from the window so it doesn't get direct sun. Otherwise these plants can easily cook and die just over one day if it's a sunny afternoon. And then deal with it that evening if you can. Always try and deal with them within 24 hours of them arriving. But ideally, as soon as they arrive, the sooner you do it, the less damage the plants will get. So these came to me a few days ago. I've actually had them opened up and watered. That's the other thing you can do, is just keep them watered in their small pots until you're ready to repot them. But I would say repot them as soon as possible, because when the plants are this small, it's very hard to water them. And when you've got plants at this size, everything happens extremely quickly. So they'll dry out very fast, they'll become overwatered very quickly. Everything just becomes a lot more difficult to look after the smaller the plant is. Same with temperature changes and other things, it's more difficult for the plant to tolerate it. So you'll get issues occurring much quicker than you would in a plant in a bigger pot. So these tiny pots, for example, if I'm not really careful with the watering, these will dry out almost instantly. There's very little water that can be contained in these tiny little pockets of soil, and so these plants will easily dry out just even one afternoon if it's warm, and they could be dead by the next day. So what you want to do, you get them repotted almost as soon as you get them. So that's what I'm going to do do now is I'm going to repot these into new plant pots. Now when it comes to potting them on, you don't want to put them into massive plant pots. They're very small plants. The roots are going to take a while to expand into the pots. So this one, for example, these plants are so small, probably just the size of, you can see the size of my thumbnail or something. I'm just going to put them into these tiny 5cm pots. 9cm pots are maybe a bit large at this stage, but if you've got some slightly larger plants, maybe a 9cm pot. But don't go ahead and put them in a giant pot. It'll take them ages to get the roots into that pot. And if you overpot a plant, it tends to suffer from overwatering quite easily because it can't absorb all the water out the compost. The compost sits there really wet, it loses the oxygen, and then the roots can start to rot off. So try and keep it in a smaller pot if you can. Put it in a pot that's definitely probably 5 to 10 times bigger than the original, but not massively bigger. So ideally I would say with larger plants I would put it in a pot 2 or 3 times the size, but when your plant is this small, unless you want to repot it once a week, you want to put it in a pot that's maybe 5 to 10 times bigger. So when it comes to handling the plants, they are going to be extremely small, so you want to be very careful with how you handle them. They're going to be very delicate. These here are primroses, so they don't have like a normal stem. They're just basically a load of leaves coming out of a root system. So if I damage the leaves, it's not a big issue. It will grow new ones, but you have to be very delicate with them all. Just very carefully lift the plant up. You want to tease them out of the pot. Quite often they'll have them in very small pots, so they're easy to pull out, but if not, you might need to push from the bottom and just carefully get them out without damaging the root system. And when you do pull them out, try to support some of the weight with the root system with your hands. If you just hold it by the stem like that, that could easily snap. So you just have to be extra careful with these plants. They're very delicate. So I'll go ahead now and pot one of these up into a new pot. So I'm just going to repot this plant into its first pot. I'm just going to repot it to the same height that it was in the soil previously. So if I very carefully take this out of its container, you can see the soil level there. And so with the new soil level, I just want to have it at the same level as it is there. So I'm just going to fill up the inside of this pot to about the right level, which is about that. And then just carefully fill in with compost. And you just want to be extremely careful and delicate with the plant. As I say, because they're so young, it's very easy to snap them or damage them. Also, the plants might have been through a lot in the transit system, so they might have been thrown around in the parcel that they came in, and the stems might be even weaker than they would be normally, so you do have to be extra careful with handling them and try not to damage the stems any further, because they will have already have got some damage. So that's it now potted in. I'm just going to gently firm it down with my finger there just to make sure it's stable in the pot, but I don't want to push down too hard and damage the roots or compact the soil too much. If you compact the soil a lot, it just means there's less space for the roots to grow. The soil's more compact, it's harder for the roots to grow through that soil, and they will struggle to get established. So as you're planting your plants up, what you want to look out for is any dead or rotting leaves. Quite often, as I say, a lot of the leaves will get damaged on transit and they might rot off. What you want to do is remove any of these that you see. If they're very loose, you can pull them away by hand, but otherwise you might want to actually use scissors because you don't want to cause any more damage by removing any of the dead material. But often that dead material, it's been in a contained space with not much airflow, it's started to go mouldy, and if that mould then spreads to the rest of the plant, it could cause further damage. So as you're unpacking it, remove any damaged material. As I say, it'll be quite common. You'll find with a lot of these mail order plants, the way they've been transported, you'll get a lot of dead, dying leaves on them. Just remove any dead or damaged leaves. As long as you've got 1 or 2 healthy ones left, it should be fine. You just don't want that disease then spreading onto the rest of the plant. So once you've got your plant planted up into its new pot, it's then time to start looking after it, getting it ready for going out into the garden, or if it's a house plant, putting it in its final position in the house. Now these plants, because they haven't had any light for 2 or 3 days, they're very sensitive to bright light. So keep it away from any direct sunlight. You want to put it in a bright location that gets a decent amount of light, but keep it away from any direct sunlight, at least for a few days, and then slowly introduce it to more and more light. Now it will depend on what type of plant you have. If it's a plant that doesn't like bright light conditions anyway, plant that's good for shady locations, then you'd never want to give it full light. You just want to give it some nice bright light. But if it is a plant that likes direct sunlight and needs good light conditions to grow well, then you'll need to slowly introduce it to bright light conditions. So the way to do that is just to start in the morning and the evening, make sure it gets a bit of direct sunlight, give it a few more hours every day, and after 2 or 3 weeks you want to slowly increase that until it's getting full sunlight pretty much all day long. Now when it comes to introducing it to the brighter daylight levels, the slower you do this, the less likely you are to get any leaf scorch, and you just need to be constantly aware that it might dry out very quickly. Until its new roots have grown into the new compost, the root system is quite small. It doesn't have a lot of moisture available for it, so it might dry out quite quick. So you just want to keep these plants evenly damp, but again, it does depend on what plant you're growing. If it's a cacti or succulent, you want to keep it quite dry. If it's a plant that likes a lot of water, you want to keep it a little bit more water. So that will start to vary as the plants get older. You need to then look up the type of plant you've got and how to look after it. But because it's a very small plant and it's been in dark conditions, damaged in transit, just look after it well for the first couple of weeks. It might be a little bit slow to get going, but because they're very small young plants, everything tends to happen quite quickly with them. So even though they might die quite quick if you haven't watered them for a while, they'll also recover really quickly and start putting on new growth really fast. So even if they are a bit stressed, whereas a larger plant will take quite a long time to recover from that stress and get going again, the young plants will probably recover in a few days or a week or so and get growing quite quickly. So they might look quite poor and sickly when they first arrive, and the original leaves on them might start to crisp up and die when they get to the stronger light conditions, but when the new leaves come through, this should be much stronger and you should get a good plant within a few weeks. So that's about it for the male elder plants. You basically want to keep them very well sheltered. If they are plants for the outside, slowly adapt them to the outside environment. These plants would have been grown in a nursery in sheltered conditions, and with them getting transported, they're going to be very delicate plants. You want to slowly transition them to the outside world so they slowly get stronger light conditions and are slowly introduced to some wind and the lower temperatures of outdoors, because if they're put out straight away without being acclimatized, they'll just get crisped up by the wind and the strong sunshine and die. So you just want to slowly acclimatize them so that they're used to it, and you also want to put them in a sheltered position for the first few months just to get them a little bit bigger until they're ready to go outside. If they're this small and they've got a tiny little root system, a bird could easily pull it out of the ground and damage it, or just one slug could probably eat this whole plant in one night, or if you have a hot dry spell, it'll die pretty quick. So do try and grow them in a sheltered location for a few weeks until they get to a decent size, and then you can plant them out in the garden. If you were just buying bedding plants normally from a garden centre, you can normally plant them outside straight away, no problem. But when it comes to plug plants and really small plants, you really do need to get them into a decent size in a more sheltered environment like a greenhouse or just a sheltered area of your garden, and then when they're up to a decent size, then you can plant them in the garden and they'll be good to grow. And when it comes to the size of the plant, it depends on the variety, but generally if they've been growing in a 9cm pot for a while and they're at the stage where they need to be repotted, that's probably the good stage to put them out in the garden. If they're tiny little plug plants and they need to be repotted, put them into a 9cm pot, wait until they fill that pot, and then put them in the garden, and you'll know they'll be a big enough size that they should be able to take off and survive the outdoor environment. So that's all for this video, and if you have any questions about mail order plants or how to look after very young plants, please let me know and I'll try and answer your questions in the comments.